you do not want this to be a game that's remembered for a negative reason, right? You listed all those things there that we remember about this game. Lenora Sellers got hurt, the penalties, the epic interception by Nikki Manwari that he ran all the way back and then it was called off. Like, you remember, you can see those moments. And when you see a series history that is so stacked in the favor of LSU, you want this to be the epic win that resets that clock. It's a reason that the win is remembered, not a loss.
Welcome onto the sideline, everybody. Matt Dowell and Claire Foley with you once again. We're back from a bye week. Everyone taking a break, getting some R&R as South Carolina and LSU enjoyed a bye week. Both coming off very different experiences. Obviously, today we're previewing South Carolina and LSU in Baton Rouge on Saturday. South Carolina beating Kentucky pretty comfortably going into their bye week. LSU losing at Ole Miss going into their bye week for their first loss of the season. So there are some interesting storylines, Claire, going into Saturday in Louisiana. So I'm excited for this game. I'm expecting an electric atmosphere on Saturday night in LSU. But let's dive into what we're thinking about this game, because this is interesting because there's not a lot of new storylines to discuss going into this one since both teams experienced a bye week. But for South Carolina, they have to be confident and feeling a lot better after the Kentucky game than they were after Missouri.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that both teams had a bye week going into this matchup, and I think they both needed it, obviously, for two different reasons. I think South Carolina, Shane Beamer talked about it in his press conference this week, said that they really needed it as like a mental and physical reset. And obviously they're coming off a win, so it's good to go into a bye week in that fashion, having that confidence, ready to just, okay, breathe, reset, get to work, clean up what we can, but we have the confidence coming out of it. Whereas LSU, obviously a really disappointing loss for them against Ole Miss. So it's like, okay, we have this week. Let's figure out what the problem was there and clean it up. Obviously, they're in a pretty comfortable position being 4-1. But I think that both teams equally needed this bye week.
And I think what's so interesting to me about this matchup is both teams kind of struggling with the same thing.
Yeah.
Especially on offense, because LSU, they obviously are 4-1 on the year, but the defense is really the star of the show for them, and their defense is fantastic. They're a really, really, really good defense. The offense, though, Claire, has struggled big time, similarly to South Carolina's.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of dynamics in this matchup about, okay, which offense is going to look better on Saturday night, which defense is going to hold up the best, and that is the part of this game that I'm really curious to see, because it's not like South Carolina's going against a team that's putting up 40, 50 points a game, things like that. LSU's offense is kind of in the 17 to 20 point range. It's just that their defense has been so good that the other teams are not scoring a lot on them outside of Ole Miss. So for me, for South Carolina's offense, it was a much better game against Kentucky, but I think this is going to be the best defense that they've played all season long.
Yeah, and time comes with that, the reps, and that. It was funny listening to both Shane Beamer and Brian Kelly's press conferences this week. I felt like I was getting deja vu because they were saying the same things. I mean, in terms of like full wide lens look at it, both were saying they really need to see complementary offense and defense. They need to see them put it together in all three phases. And in terms of the offense, need to get the run game going. And it was literally hearing the same things twice in a row, back to back, between the two coaches. I think that we definitely saw better defense from South Carolina against Kentucky. And I think, like I said, going into the bye week, you have that confidence. Now it's just, okay, the reps that they were able to get, maybe the tape they were able to look at. And luckily for both teams, there isn't a lot that's changing from last time that they played to this year. Obviously, South Carolina is missing some key pieces. Obviously, you don't have Rocket Sanders coming up with big plays, Nikki Manwari in those situations. But when you have Lenore Sellers and Garrett Nussmeier that kind of even things out a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating matchup when you look at both teams, what they're bringing to this game, and how they are struggling with similar things, and maybe some of the things they're even doing well are very similar. But LSU has been the much better overall team this season, just from an overall play standpoint. But when you talk about the offensive identity, I think that's something that LSU is looking for at this point in the season. It's a work in progress for them. I think you can say the same thing for South Carolina. And Shane Beamer at his press conference this week on Talkin' Tuesday, he was asked what the offensive identity is for South Carolina, and here's what he had to say.
Told our players, coaches, we're still developing, and the brand and the identity that we play with, there were a lot of signs of that against Kentucky last Saturday night. And offensively, as I told you guys, to line up and run the ball 14 straight plays or 14 out of 15, that's a pretty strong freaking identity right there that we put on tape against Kentucky, that we want to continue to put on tape. The ability to run the football and make explosives in the passing game. We've shown signs of that throughout the season with our big plays in the passing game, with our ability to finish the game like we did running the ball the other night offensively against Kentucky. We just haven't done it consistently enough.
So they are developing, as Shane Beamer says, on this offensive identity. And, we're about to be halfway through the season, so we'll see what they bring coming into Baton Rouge off of a bye week, if they've added anything, if anything is cleaner, especially on the penalty side of things, if the running game gets better. So we'll see what that identity looks like on Saturday. But I know, Claire, you wanted to say something about kind of comparing the schedules of South Carolina and LSU going into Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about both teams coming in with wanting to fix or address certain areas of their game, and at a glance, when you look at the records, you would say, oh, LSU has the advantage. And we'll get to our predictions later. That probably is the case, that LSU has the advantage here. But LSU's 4-1. 2 of those wins in their middle games came against Louisiana State and Southern Louisiana. Comparatively, South Carolina played Vandy and South Carolina State, which you might say, oh, South Carolina, they won their conference championship last year. Mm-hmm. Like, South Carolina State is no, rollover, and, it's a shoe-in game. And you saw that in the beginning of that game.
And Vandy's turned into a top 20 team.
Right. And so I think that goes back to Shane Beamer's argument always about strength of schedule. And, hey, that's even come up this week with them canceling their Miami game. That was something that he talked about in the press conference, that some teams are going to schedule where they have high competition every single week. And he said coming into now after the bye week to the rest of the season, he told his team, hey, if you're not ready to play top 10, top 15 teams every single week, which South Carolina looks like they'll be having the rest of the way, then you picked the wrong school. You picked the wrong conference to play in.
Yeah, and we'll hear from Shane Beamer in just a minute about just how brutal this October is, because they do play LSU, they play Oklahoma, they play Bama, they play Ole Miss.
It's boom.
It's not easy. But you do have to kind of shrink that. You can't think about Oklahoma and Bama and all that right now. Right now, it just has to be about the LSU Tigers. But I did want to ask you, Claire, because you've actually gotten to see LSU already this season. You were at the Clemson game to open up the season, and I know so much has happened since that game. But what stood out to you about LSU, good and bad, in that opening week that you noticed right away?
I think that's something that Brian Kelly brought up this week that he wants to really address, is them starting early. And that's something that came up in the Clemson game. They didn't score at all in the first quarter. After the first half, it was Clemson up 10-3. So that's going to be an area they need to address this week. But it also shows that they're able to finish games, which that's been something that we've talked about on this podcast that South Carolina hasn't been necessarily able to do. Last time I was on here, I talked about how there were, in every single game, either in the third or fourth quarter or both, South Carolina didn't score. And that happened again against Kentucky. They didn't score in the third quarter, I think it was. And so that's definitely an area where both teams are saying going into it, they need to play 4 quarters on Saturday.
Let's look at the series history between these two. We do this every single week. And for the past few, it's either been in favor of South Carolina or pretty even. But Claire, with this series history, it is all in LSU's favor, which makes this matchup even harder for the Gamecocks, I think, when you look at the history between these two. But Saturday will be the 24th meeting all-time between LSU and South Carolina. LSU leads that series history 20-2 20-1. So 20 of the 23 games have ended in wins for LSU. They are 13-1 against South Carolina in Baton Rouge. So this has been proven to be one of the harder away road games for South Carolina to get a win in. LSU's won the last 8 games of this matchup, and South Carolina's last win was in 1994.
Yeah.
So it has been a long time since they've gotten a win over LSU, and those stats don't favor you if you're South Carolina. But I think if you're looking at recent history, last year was really close.
Yeah.
It was a 36-33 heartbreaker for South Carolina, and I know everyone's going to have opinions about how the refs screwed South Carolina. I agree. I agree that the officiating was awful in that game, but either way, no matter which way you turn it, Lenoris got hurt. There was a lot going on in that week 3 matchup last year. But last year, if you're just looking at the recent history of 12 months ago, South Carolina was very much in that game and probably should have won it. And then you can also look at a lot of the guys on South Carolina's team last year are not here this year. So, how much of these stats, what stats do you pick out if you're South Carolina? But last year was an opportunity for South Carolina to get a win, and it ended in heartbreak.
And I think that is there's a reason at the end of a season you remember certain games, and that's even carried over until this year. I mean, you could say that South Carolina, because they lost that game, they didn't make they got into the Cheez-It Bowl instead of making the playoffs, and they didn't get a bid. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing going into this game, is that you do not want this to be a game that's remembered for a negative reason, right? You listed all those things there that we remember about this game. Lenora Sellers got hurt, the penalties, the epic interception by Nicky Manwari that he ran all the way back and then it was called off. You remember, you can see those moments. And when you see a series history that is so stacked in the favor of LSU, you want this to be the epic win that resets that clock. It's a reason that the win is remembered, not a loss. And you can look back and say, oh yeah, I remember LSU last year, all these good things, not, yeah, that LSU game last year. Whew.
That's just when everything went wrong. And I think it's interesting because Shane Beamer was asked about last year and if it is a motivating factor. And he said he's really not thinking about it. And I do believe him, because I think in my job just covering sports over the last few years, I don't think players and coaches think like that the same way that fans and analysts do, because I think in Shane's mind, it was 12 months ago. Both teams have changed so much has happened in that time. I don't think it's like, a rematch like a week later, from that game. I just think so much has happened in that time. Are they still mad about that loss last year as competitors? Heck yeah, they are. I mean, come on now. Of course they're still mad. But are they going into Saturday saying, oh, we want revenge on last year? I don't really think so, no. Because it was so long ago and South Carolina's so different. LSU's been going through things and, they're playing in Baton Rouge. It's just a completely different matchup.
And that was in September last year,
it was week
too,
3.
Right? So it was a long time ago. I think game day was here. So there was a lot building up for reasons why people remember it in the first place. Obviously, the things that happened on the field, but just the atmosphere in general that day. But you also... I don't think there's much revenge seeking in a game 3 game or week 3 game in September, a full year later.
And I think for South Carolina, they just want to get a win. It's been an up and down first 5 weeks. I think they're just focusing on winning this game to try and kind of stay alive in this playoff conversation, because if they lose this game, I think they're kind of out of the playoff conversation as we go into the second half of the season. But we told you guys that the series history is very much in LSU's favor. Again, they've won 20 of the 23 games against South Carolina. So, Claire, tell us what's at stake for South Carolina on Saturday in Baton Rouge.
Well, a lot of these notes are related to that record.
Yeah.
So, it give Gamecocks their first win over the Tigers since 1994. After a 2020 tie in 1995. It would give the Gamecocks their third win in 24 tries against LSU. We talked about how much LSU wins in the series by, but it would also give Shane Beamer his 250th career win as a college coach. Wow. Not as a head coach, but as a coach in his collegiate career.
That's awesome.
So number 250.
Number 250 on the line at night in Baton Rouge. That'd be a big one, for Shane Beamer. But the numbers for South Carolina not in their favor, and I do think this would be an upset, a big upset to beat LSU in Baton Rouge. I think it's one of the hardest places to get a win, especially at night. It's homecoming for LSU. So if you're looking at this on paper, I think this greatly favors LSU. And if South Carolina, they like the underdog role, I think they go in there saying, let's just shock everyone. I don't think there's any pressure on South Carolina in this game because I don't know how many people are expecting them to win, quite frankly. So I would like to see South Carolina go down to Baton Rouge and just play free. Just try and play clean football, try and play good football. And it's going to be a tough atmosphere on Saturday.
And I think in that way, a lot of it is South Carolina against themselves because of the way we've seen them beat themselves this year, especially with the penalties and stuff like that. So I think that maybe it can be a bit of a weight off their shoulders that it's not a expected win. Like, it's great if they do. It's understandable if they don't. And they can just go out and be them.
Yeah. To me, this is the first game for South Carolina this season where it's not kind of like they're either the favorite or it's a 50-50. I think this is the first game of the season where they are the true underdog. And so I'm excited to see how South Carolina goes into this game playing that role. But we also talked, Claire, about how this is the beginning of a gauntlet of an October for South Carolina. And we talked about it every week of how important those first 5 games were to set them up for this schedule. But they go to Baton Rouge on Saturday, and then it's Oklahoma here in Columbia, Bama here in Columbia. They go to Ole Miss. They got A&M coming up after that. So it is going to be boom, 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 boom. But it all starts Saturday in LSU. They got to compartmentalize if you're the Gamecocks, and Shane Beamer says that's exactly what they're doing.
One at a time, but if you don't want to play that schedule, I told our players, y'all chose the wrong conference to come play in. Like, you should have gone play in another conference. If you don't want to play that schedule, you chose the wrong school to come to. I mean, that's just life in this league. So don't tell me in recruiting and when we brought you in the portal that you want to compete and you want to play against the best in the SEC, now all of a sudden shy away from it and look at our schedule and say, oh, shoot, look who we got to play. Look who we get to play. And again, if you don't want to compete against the best, there's plenty of other conferences that they don't play ranked teams every single week. There's plenty of other conferences where you don't go in front of 100,000 people every Saturday. There's plenty of other conferences where you don't play against NFL draft picks all over the field every single Saturday. You do in this league. And as a competitor, that's what our guys chose to do. So I get tired of look at South Carolina's schedule and things like that. And I get it. It is what it is. But look at everybody else's schedule in the SEC. I mean, look who Oklahoma plays the next 5 weeks. Look who Missouri plays, LSU, Alabama. Who else was I looking at their schedule? Texas, I think. I mean, there's a lot of teams. Just look at the month of October, and all it is ranked team after ranked team after ranked team because that's what the SEC is. There's a reason. I don't even know what the rankings are this week, but 10 of the top 20 teams in the country, for God's sakes, were in the Southeastern Conference last week. 10 of the top 20, guys. So everybody plays a tough opponent because it's the greatest conference in America. And as a competitor, you love that opportunity to go compete. So that's been my message. Let's go freaking compete because this is what y'all came here for.
Every week on our game day preview episodes, I'd like to have a journalist from the opposing market, the opposing team that South Carolina is facing to get the perspective of the Gamecocks opponent. And this week I spoke with my friend Cory Diaz from the Daily Advertiser in Louisiana. A lot of you guys might remember him because he covered the Gamecocks for a few years here in Columbia. Then he moved down to Louisiana, and now he covers LSU. But I got to talk to him about the Tigers, their offensive struggles, and what the Tigers are hoping to see from themselves on Saturday night in Baton Rouge. I'm here with my friend Cory Diaz from the Daily Advertiser in Louisiana. Cory, welcome to our show, man. It's good to see you. I know you covered the Gamecocks back in the day for a little bit, and now you've been in Louisiana for a few years, so I appreciate you joining the show.
Yeah, man, it's always good to spend time with you, my friend. Appreciate the invite.
So this matchup with LSU and South Carolina is very interesting. They're both coming off of bye weeks. For LSU, though, they're coming off a loss to Ole Miss entering the bye week. So what is the vibe like in Baton Rouge right now after the loss and after the bye week?
Yeah, I think it's you sprinkle in some anger with some disappointment, right? They look, it's weird because if you go back and watch the Ole Miss game, they probably shouldn't have been in it. It felt like, especially from a statistical standpoint, I think Ole Miss gained 480 yards. Ole Miss only had 250. The first down discrepancy between the two offenses was pretty substantial. But somehow they had the ball halfway through the fourth quarter, with a chance to go down and take the lead in that game. So that obviously speaks volumes to how well this defense has been able to play, in really more often than not through the first 5 games. But offensively, it's just been inconsistent. The run game hasn't really been there. Garrett Nussmeier has dealt with a core injury that's sort of preventing his ability to sort of take the lid off of defenses, and so you don't really have that element of the offense to keep opposing defenses honest. And I think Ole Miss's defense did a really good job of sort of exploiting that. So I know we spoke with some players yesterday afternoon, and especially the offensive guys. It's been we really did a lot of self-scout, and we're trying to fix all the things that we're currently struggling with, along the offensive line. It's been, again, the lack of being able to open up run lanes and pass protect at times has sort of fallen by the wayside. And, and defensively, third down defense has been an issue. That was an issue 2 weekends ago in Oxford. So, when you've got a guy like Lenore Sellers coming in, what they like to do offensively, it's obviously not the same as what Lane does with his offense at Ole Miss, but Lenoris has the ability to make something out of nothing, and broken down plays seem to be where he shines most. So it's going to be a really interesting matchup Saturday night.
Going off of that, you touched on a few things, but one of those being the offensive struggles. And that has been a theme for LSU this season. And even with those offensive struggles, they are 4-1 this season. And that Ole Miss game, was still close. So is there a theme to why these struggles have been going on, and how fixable are the issues?
Yeah, I think the reality of it, Matt, is that especially the offensive issues are 100% fixable. It's a matter of execution. I think that's just been where the offense has struggled most, has just been with this execution. And the thing that sticks out to me is it's along the offensive line. They've played, Brian Kelly and Joe Sloan, the offensive coordinator, and Brad Davis, the offensive line coach. They've played 8 guys along the offensive line through the first 5 games, and what I would call, quote unquote, like meaningful snaps in games. Usually, it's 5, maybe 6 guys, because you kind of know who your best 5 are. But look, going back 5 weeks ago, heading into the season opener at Clemson, we were a week away from kickoff, and Brian Kelly's, talking with us after a practice saying, that he anticipates there being 6 or 7 guys along the offensive line playing at Clemson. That's a bit unusual. And I think that from a chemistry and cohesion standpoint, I think it's fair to say that some of that has been hindered a little bit by sort of the rotation that's happened along the offensive line. And when you do that, when you don't really have that cohesion up front, like it is really hard to open up run lanes for your running backs. It is really hard to protect your quarterback for longer than 3 seconds. Because you're basically lining up against a guy, to your left or your right that maybe you've only, snapped next to him, a handful of times or 10 times, as opposed to, someone who you've, snapped the ball against, 150 times. So there's just still, I think the offense is still kind of learning each other in a way. You've got all these, transfer wide receivers that are uber talented, but, they've only played 5 games with Garrett Nussmeier. And so that's going to take time too. So it's all fixable. The thing is if you're Brian Kelly, you're the coaching staff, what you hate about this is that, it takes time, but you're having to play games while you're figuring it out.
Yeah, I think we've seen kind of both teams. South Carolina, they've had their offensive struggles. They're kind of going through the same thing. of trying to see what works, but also trying to do it during the season and try and fix things. So it's interesting that there is a parallel between the two in that sense. But for LSU on the other side of the ball, the defense for the most part has been pretty good. I think that they are an excellent defense. When LSU's defense is clicking well, what makes them so dangerous?
Yeah, I think it's honestly, man, it's ability at all levels. I think, this is Blake Baker, defense coordinator. It's his second season here, and he's got a skill set that allows him to really call games based on kind of what the offense likes to do, and he really can't counteract it. Because the guys that they added in the transfer portal along the defensive line, your Jamari Butlers, your Patrick Paytons, your Jack Pyburns, along the defensive end spots, these guys have been able to get in and affect the quarterback. And then you got the Weeks brothers at linebacker, along with Harold Perkins, who's an absolute heat missile. You know what I mean? Like a heat-seeking missile, off the edge when they have him rush. And then, this is probably the best secondary LSU has had. Man, I'd say this one might be better than the 2019 national championship defense, just because you have two guys that can cover on islands at the cornerback spots, and PJ Woodland and Mansour Delane. But really, where LSU's defense took the biggest step was at safety, with AJ Halsey and Tamarcus Cooley coming in. AJ came in from Houston. Tamarcus came in from North Carolina State. AJ was an all Big 12 guy last season. But where they have been able to help this defense most is with their tackling. Last year, really the last 2 years, 2 years that I've been on the football beat, back end tackling on the defense has been a killer for LSU's defense. And so these guys are very sure tacklers. They've been able to, up to this point, prevent the really big play.
Brian Kelly, as they get ready for this game, we spoke about them coming off the bye week, coming off the loss. What has he said this week about what he wants to see from his team against South Carolina?
Yeah, it goes back to the buzzword the last couple of weeks has been complementary football. Mm-hmm. And what he means by that is when our offense is playing well, we also need our defense playing well. If our offense are stringing together, series of downs, going down, putting up points on the board, we need our defense to follow that up immediately with a 3-and-out or forcing a punt. Or if our defense is stopping the opposing offense, we need our offense to go out and string drives together, sustain drives, string plays together, go down, get points. That was something that, if you look back at the Ole Miss game, defense had a really solid first half. Although they were on the field for 50-something plays, which is not ideal, especially on the road, right? And then in the second half, the offense started sustaining drives, putting points on the board, but then the defense was gassed. So you have to find that balance, sort of that harmony between playing good offensive football, sustaining drives, and the defense complementing that with being able to force 3-and-outs and or turnovers, or just not allowing the opposing offense to flip the field, have to punt, and then to sort of narrow the focus again offensively. Got to run the football. You got to figure out a way to get the offensive linemen up front to open up those run lanes for a Juwan Johnson or a Caleb Jackson. You've got to figure out ways to balance the offensive attack. You can't, honestly, Matt, if Garrett's asked to throw the ball 45 times Saturday night, that to me, several days out from the game spells that they're in trouble going into the fourth quarter. You got to figure out a way to sort of keep him in that 28 to 32 pass attempt range. I feel like if they're in that range, they go into the fourth quarter, they probably feel good about where they are.
I love to look at the matchups within the matchups every single week. There's always kind of, the face-off that we're all looking forward to. For this game on Saturday, what's the matchup within the matchup that you're really interested in watching to see how that plays out?
Dylan Stewart versus whoever he's matched up against with the LSU's offensive line. Look, because they're, outside of the center spot, Braylon Moore, the junior Virginia Tech transfer, like it's either freshmen or sophomores, along the offensive line. Now, Josh Thompson is a Northwestern transfer at right guard. He is a grad transfer from there. But the other three spots, Tyree Adams, left tackle, redshirt freshman, right tackle. And again, it's this thing. Is it Weston Davis, who's a redshirt freshman? Is it going to be Carius Kern, who is a true freshman at right tackle? We don't know yet because Weston Davis got hurt before the Ole Miss game, literally during pregame warmups 2 weekends ago. Now he's been cleared, but Carius Kern actually performed okay in his first ever collegiate start at Ole Miss. So who's getting the tip? Like, we don't know who's getting the hat tip there. Paul Mabinga's battling a high ankle sprain. He's a sophomore. He plays left guard. We could be looking at a situation where a Cohen Eccles or a DJ Chester is playing left guard, and both of those guys are sophomores. So the South Carolina's defensive line versus Ole Miss's LSU's offensive line is I think is going to be the matchup that's probably going to tell the tale of what happens Saturday night. Because look, if South Carolina wins that matchup and Garrett doesn't have any time to throw the ball and they can't open up run lanes, like there is a world out there where South Carolina comes in and wins by 10. Now, if LSU gets the better of that matchup, there's a world where LSU wins by 17. So like that to me, kind of where the balance of this game hangs right there, just in those, battle of, 7 or 8 guys.
It's interesting. I've asked that question in every single of our game day previews, and I think almost every journalist has said Dylan Stewart versus the O-line. So I think that says a lot about Dylan Stewart and how good he is and what a presence he is, and that challenge. So Cory, thank you so much for joining our show, man. We've been friends for a long time. I'm happy we got to talk to you, and hang out and talk football. And I know we'll be seeing you throughout the SEC season, but thank you for giving us the insight and the perspective of LSU. You're going to be there. Are you going to be there on Saturday? We're not going to get to go down. You're going to be there on Saturday?
I will be there, man. I'll be there.
Oh, that atmosphere in Baton Rouge at night, it's very, very special. But LSU, South Carolina, again, that's Cory Diaz from the Daily Advertiser in Louisiana. Cory, thanks for joining our show, and have fun on Saturday.
Yeah, appreciate you, Matt. Take care, buddy.
I want to thank my friend Cory Diaz for joining our podcast this week to talk about LSU and give us the perspective of the Tigers. He does a lot with their women's basketball team as well, so I have a feeling he'll be back on the podcast.
See him again.
Yeah, I think you guys are going to see him again. He does a lot of work with Kim Mulkey and LSU and covers them very, very well. So give him a follow if you want to keep up with the latest on LSU football, basketball, baseball. He does it all. All right, Claire, it's time for our final thoughts and predictions as we go into Saturday's game. And this one's a hard one score-wise to predict because of the offensive struggles of both teams. But what do you think? What do you got?
I'm going to say 24-21 LSU. I'd really like to see a multi-touchdown game from Lenora Sellers, maybe see it in different ways, see it in the run game, see it in the pass game. I just think LSU just has the edge in this one, and I don't think it'll be a particularly high-scoring game for those reasons. So I think a handful of touchdowns for both teams and see what we can do.
Yeah, I'm going the same way. I think we're going to see a lot of good defense in this game. I think we're going to see some offense. I don't expect either team, based off what we've seen this season, to start lighting it up, either way. But I'm going to go LSU this week as well. I'm going to pick 21-17. I think the environment's going to play a huge part in this. Sure. LSU is going to be rocking in Baton Rouge, and I think that their defense is really going to be the key to this game. I think LSU's defense is what's going to get them this win, and I think they'll have enough to get past South Carolina. But again, South Carolina is going to be the underdog, and I'm excited to see how they play, because Lenoris, when he did play in that game last year, played very, very well. So we'll see how Lenoris steps up on Saturday.
And let's see special teams get back into it. I mean, they have those, that's what makes a Shane Beamer team, a Beamer team in general, special. That was kind of the missing key before. So let's bring that back and see if that can be the edge in where the offense maybe is a little more even in teams in terms of what they've got working for them right now, and then come up with Dylan Stewart on the defense.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. And it's interesting because Kentucky was a lot more positive offensively. It was a lot more positive defensively. Shane Beamer did say, though, the special teams is what he was most disappointed in against Kentucky. So we'll see, how everyone gets better. Everyone's had a week, 2 weeks off, off. They practice, obviously. They've had it off from
They had like one single day off.
But we'll see how South Carolina, what adjustments they've made, what they've worked on, and I think we're gonna see it right away against LSU and see what they're bringing to the table. We're picking LSU, but as always, everybody, let us know your thoughts and predictions on this game. Who are you taking, LSU or South Carolina? Give us your score predictions, your concerns, your positivity, whatever you want to add to our show. We just leave it in the comments. We love hearing your feedback. As everybody watching and listening. As always, make sure you guys like, subscribe, comment, and follow on YouTube or wherever you listen to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Amazon Music. She's Claire Foley. I'm Matt Dowell. South Carolina and LSU kick off at 7:45 Eastern Time on Saturday night down in Baton Rouge. We'll be watching, and we'll have our instant reaction right after the game is finished. She's Claire. I'm Matt. We'll see you next time here on South Carolina Sideline.